you wrote this piece in a 2022 deep dive into the American New Right for Vanity Fair. And during that, you had a conversation with Vance that you said revealed someone who I think will be hugely influential in our politics in the coming years. So that came true. What did you see in Vance at that time that caused you to predict that?
Well, whatever you think of his politics, he's very smart. And I think that's something that people across the aisle perceive very quickly. He's smart to a degree that is not just, I mean, candidly, this is a quote from Tucker Carlson, but uh, most Tucker Carlson once told me that most congressmen are so stupid that you can't listen to them long enough for a soundbite. Um, and there's like, I mean, that's just objectively true. And then there's a class of congressmen that is like pretty smart that you can like have a beer with, and you're like, oh yeah, you're actually like thinking about stuff. JD's not like either of those. JD's like an actual intellectual. And that's I think what makes him so frustrating to so many of his enemies. It's what kind of like gives him a superpower in the spaces like the vice presidency, because he can like eat shit and he can do the politics, he can do the kind of like soundbitey debate stuff. He can go on C block on, like Tucker or Laura Ingraham or something, and like when he's a Senate candidate, and he can deliver these lines about like how Kyle Rittenhouse did nothing wrong. But then you get him in a room and you're like, oh shoot, I just actually didn't know that Stalin did that. And so he's like calling back to stuff that like other politicians trying to debate him, even in private, like are just like kind of disarmed by.
Mhm.
Um, and you don't really get a ton of people like that in politics. And it gives you a lot of room to run. Um, and I'm not sure if people know this, but like this was apparent to people a long time ago. Like, I mean, David Frum was hosting dinners to prep JD Vance for a presidential run, like shortly after he published his book, when he was
Oh.
still like a pudgy faced kid railing against Trump. And of course, it worked out badly for the neocons who were grooming him because he turned against them. Um, but like he was their great hope. And so
Hmm.
this has been apparent to people for a long time.
Huh, I did not know that. When is it possible that that is going to be a liability though in the future? If we dare to think ahead to like how where will the mantle of MAGA be passed next? I mean, Trump is such a unique figure because he is it. You know, this is not breaking any new ground, but he's a deal maker at his heart, and so there's a sort of flexibility to Trump, whereas someone like JD Vance, this intellectual, I think really he lives in this world of ideas. He's an ideologue. That might be a liability. Like, do you think people, and I think that's kind of what the Democrats were trying to hone in on with the weird, we're branding him as weird because he's this very online like idea guy. Um, is that possibly an Achilles heel for him?
Well, I mean, I think it's almost impossible to overstate how much, um, just like the dissident right, so to speak, which is very much like sort of the internet ferment from which JD comes in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But like more so like the broader sort of like Twitter ideological policing and ferment, that has arisen in the Musk era. I think it's impossible to overstate how powerful that is right now. I don't think that this movement can really like, I basically think we're gonna go into, like, a dark night of totalitarianism, or that's gonna, like, end, because I just, like, I don't see how you can have such lockstep, hardcore ideological policing, such as they're experiencing right now, go on forever without it, like, shooting into something really crazy, or it just sort of, like, falling apart because they all kind of, like, brain warp them into something that, normal Americans think is too weird. Um,
Hmm.
and so I think we're actually living through a really unstable and weird period of time where we're gonna have to figure out whether they turn their guns after they finish their little quiet revolution going after their enemies in the centrist elite and on the left and things like that. And this is told to me by people very much in the Trump circle, that they're gonna have to soon turn their guns on the right to sorta, like, get some of this under
Wow.
control. Um, and I think if that doesn't happen, um, they could be in a lot of trouble. I think you have seen JD work himself into places that I find really, really kind of horrible with regard to, for example, Springfield, where you have, he is again an intellectual. He wrote, he conversed with, I think it was Zed Jelani, like at great length about why he thought it was justified to fan this thing that he said in his own words he knew was not true about people eating cats and dogs in Springfield.
Right.
And he was willing to engage in what was fundamentally a lie because it was politically expedient. And then he had this whole kind of like idea of like how it was directionally true and all this stuff. Well, I don't know. What do you think about that? We can all just debate that. At that time, you could probably argue that the kind of weird Twitter insanity did probably work out to his benefit. And it may indeed have helped them win an election that they would have not won if Musk, actually almost certainly would not have won if Musk hadn't taken over Twitter. Now, though, like the kind of earnesty and the kind of intellectual flexibility and stuff like that that we saw on display nationally in the vice presidential debate uh, is increasingly difficult for anyone in the MAGA spheres to actually display because, like, if you cross lines, like people come at you in such weird, insane ways, and like Elon will put you up on accounts called like "I found a retard" and stuff. It's big, very unseemly and off-putting, and kind of it rewards the dumbest, lowest grade voices in the whole thing. And the entire appeal of JD is that he's not the dumbest and lowest grade voice in this movement, right? So I would imagine that would be a pretty severe constraint, unless they get that sorted out.
There's a really interesting tension to me here between this idea of JD Vance as extremely weird, which in some ways he is, right? Because anybody who's read any Curtis Yarvin is a weird person. Anybody who spends a lot of time masticating on the memes currently circulating on the dissident right, like that's a weird type of person. And yet at the same time, the line attempted, that was launched by the Harris Walls campaign really did not land because I think so many normal and less online Americans looked at JD Vance and said, he's like a dad of 3 from the Rust Belt. He dresses decently. He kind of looks like we do. He seems like he enjoys a Super Bowl party. Like there's a certain amount of like he is both weird and he is so decidedly not. And this I feel like is somewhat indicative or representative of a broader tension within the MAGA world where there's like on one hand, there's these deeply unserious policy objectives, like to some degree, the way Doge is being cut, especially honed by Elon Musk, makes it feel as though he's sort of making a mockery of the whole project and very sloppy and unserious with the way he attempts to go about slashing the federal bureaucracy. And yet, at the same time, there are these deeply serious and very ideological hobby horses of a lot of parts of the new right. Like, for example, really trying to bolster family policy and attempting to sort of have this reinvigorating of the American family and trying to really JD Vance has done a very good job of not just, I think kind of mocking the childless cat ladies on the television, which I think, probably plays well to some degree, though less vitriol would be better. But to some degree, there are lots of normal Americans out there who look at some of the trends in fertility and family formation and are like, wait a second, people should get married and people should have families. That's like a nice thing to do. That's what we did. How do we make it easier for people to do that if they're saying that it's simply untenable now? And JD Vance really seems to care about that sort of thing. So, all of that's to say, what do you make of this tension between JD Vance is extraordinarily weird and actually he's not weird at all? Or JD Vance pursues deeply unserious, stupid things, yet also the most serious things? Like, which one do you think will ultimately win out? And do you think this sort of back and forth will be a liability for him?
Yeah. I mean, so I was at the DNC and I mean kind of I use this to what I hope was comedic effect in the piece that I wrote about it, where, like, I went to this, like, Hotties for Harris party where they were giving out, like, free Plan B, and
Yeah.
there was, like, all this well, you can kind of
I
imagine probably what
I
Hotties for Harris
literally
was like.
I literally LOL'd at the lead to that story when I was reading it to prepare for this, so
Oh,
it
I
worked.
appreciate that. Okay, good. Yeah. And what I'm driving at for people who haven't read the piece without re-describing it for everyone is that it was a very weird party with a lot of very weird people there. And then all over the walls in neon was like, don't be weird, this kind of thing. And, it was just like, okay, guys, this is not going to work. Um, and then Musk like actually is weird. Like the the tension that I see right now is honestly, this is kind of like boring to talk about. I wish that we were talking about more interesting things. And I wish we were talking about like these kind of bigger, deeper philosophical issues that you're bringing up. Right now in this administration, I do think that like the kind of big issue is like how much power does Musk have at this moment and how much power will Musk have going forward? How much power will all of these fundamentally quite weird, not all of them, and some of them are quite smart and some of them are quite aligned in certain ways with this understanding in America, I think that we all have that like we shot out of really basic stuff about like what makes happy families and happy people and things like this. Um, but then you have Musk with like 13 IVF babies and like, by the way, like wearing t-shirts in the Oval Office. Why are we talking about Zelensky wearing his turtleneck? Like that, even like stuff like that, like
Point.
he gets a pass for being weird. Um, so this is a long way of saying like I think Democrats very quickly, you saw last night, at the joint address, you saw them put up Alyssa Slotkin and someone working real hard not to be weird. And someone who, in fact, what I thought the most interesting and least discussed bit of it was someone who really said, like, America's at a crossroads right now. America's at a turning point. She almost said the quiet part out loud, like liberalism, sort of big L liberalism, the idea set that forms the Western world is like not really working for people right now. Um, and that we're gonna have to figure out something else and we're on uncertain waters and all that kind of stuff. That I think is really what got people loving the MAGA movement. This kind of feeling of like the soul, the inner core issues that like gave me a sense of who I am and what this nation is and stuff like that. Those are gone. And like a lot of people saw in Trump this, as he talks about golden dawn, new era, golden era, all this stuff. What that's speaking to is a sense of national vitalization, a sense of participation in the nation, an almost Napoleonic sense that there's one guy who's listening to you and is going to revitalize, pick up the crown of France, put it on, and say this thing is back. Um,
Yeah.
and I think that was JD's project all along. So family formation, a sense of national identity, a sense of participation within the nation, things like that. That was his project all along, and there was something very weird about Democrats saying that that was weird. Um, and that was a really losing argument. The idea that it was like fascism to talk about being a part of a nation with a core identity and things like this, right? The problem is that like actually they just do have a lot of fascists too.
Mm.
And that stuff's not fake. That's not like shrieking, Russiagate liberals saying that. They just do have a lot of people who are really, really pretty far out there.
Yeah.
And they're really exposed to those people. Like that stuff's not fake.
Hey, that was a clip from Just Asking Questions. You can watch another one here or the full episode here. And please subscribe to our brand new channel to get us started off right and be notified when new episodes or clips go up. Thanks for watching.